Pokemon X and Y. Oh boy, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to take a deep dive into one of Pokemon's more overly disliked games. The one that started a very odd transition from 2D to 3D that may have been responsible for dividing the fan base. You know, for reasons outside of brainless new fan and old fan arguments. A set of games not remembered for their quality, but rather the legacy left behind. After all, why remember any details about the game when you could just slap one word on it and spread that single thought everywhere on the internet and call it a day? Obviously, I'm not the type of person to leave an argument there, so that's why I'm stepping in to intervene in this, whatever this is, to look at all the good, all the bad, and all the more conflicting parts of the game, to see what the game is really like, rather than that nonsense you hear from internet echo chambers. So with our intro out of the way, it's time to get the ball rolling into this very oddly handled game of interesting highs and some deep lows. With another game comes another world to explore. Pokemon X and Y bring us the Kalos region, a French-inspired region of vast scale, despite being moderately sized in play space, but this time around transitioned into the world of 3D. While we'll talk about the visuals later, this focus is of course pointed at the gameplay side of things. And gameplay-wise, this perspective in the environments doesn't really change too much. Sometimes the camera hides paths, but sometimes it just helps us focus on some good set pieces, and rarely some gameplay sections that actually make good use of these environments, mostly making the world look pretty damn nice. Of course, backed by its cinematic camera angles and noticeable terrain differences. The other gameplay bonuses are pretty nice though. Firstly, we get the ability to run in diagonals now, which is super nice. But why would that matter when you can just walk off the grid? Yeah, the perks of having a circle pad are pretty damn nice. Now, what if we took that circle pad movement, but not only applied it to the bike, which is just completely optional in these games, but of course add it to the game's new roller skates, which sadly end up making the bike feel pretty obsolete in terms of just being another thing that makes you move faster, that you also could just get earlier in the game. Plus, unlike the bike, it actually has its own places to explore, and even a gym dedicated to the feature. It's a fun inclusion, but I'm not gonna lie, it's a massive shame this feature never came back. But of course, your tools may be one thing, but the land is the more important part. So yeah, progression. Much like Pokemon Black and White previously, the game is abnormally linear to play through. Start at the bottom of the map, move towards Limio City, and explore all of the left side of the map, and then loop through the middle and bulldoze straight to the right. And ta-da! Game ended. Congratulations, you did it. But of course, that begs a question. Is the game too linear? In comparison to Black and White, the game just lacks optional side areas, and the ones they do have are hardly deemed areas, mostly due to just being nothing or not completely accessible yet. Meaning the game gets forced more into its main areas than it has any right to. And sure, most of the routes are larger than they appear. This does help a lot. Plus, the game's main story doesn't even progress in a non-linear manner, which is good as the gameplay cannot suffer as a direct result. So pretty linear would suffice, maybe not too linear, but definitely pretty linear. Anyways, do you ever think about how the ride Pokemon were actually introduced in this game as their first appearance? Yeah, I sure as hell forgot about it. And in these games, 3 of them ever show up, and they're pretty neat. But sadly, they're all locked to specific routes that they're found on. Skidoo being a fast fellow with the ability to go up ledges for some fast fun. Meanwhile, Mamoswine and Rhyhorn are used to cross impassable terrain and smash rocks. Yeah, sure, Lapras exists, but it's just a surf cosmetic difference. But at the end of the day, these do end up being fun features that at least make their respective routes have more personality, which is always a blessing. And rounding out this section, we gotta look at that muzzle on team building. HMs. And surprisingly this time, the muzzle was not on very tight, as there's only 2 instances of forced HMs this time around. Surf as early as after the 3rd gym, and Strength once during Victory Road. Yeah, that's it. Of course, making the situation better, there's a free gift mon you can get that gets both HMs. Sure, you might want to fly, especially during the climax of the story, granted that one of the entrances to Geosench Town is off limits, but you know, you could still just walk there. Although obviously at this point, you're gonna use fly, let's be honest. So yeah, 2 attacks that are forced in the team builder, and both aren't half bad, keeping HMs as a not so annoying set of shackles this time around. So with that said, we get to dive into all the fun gameplay related nonsense. The mechanical side of Pokemon X and Y is pretty fun, one with a few missteps and some needed modernizations to make the games far less tedious. It's a thrilling evolution to the battle scene that is a much needed step forward to a more successful formula, despite not being that itself. So let's start our peek behind the curtain to this machine with the type chart. The type chart itself started a bit wacky in Generation 1, and in Generation 2 got a bit of a rework. Certain interactions were made better, but most were made worse by neutering types that were already struggling. But the introduction of Dark and Steel types made a much larger impact on the game. Taking a play from those games, X and Y made a new type and tried balancing one out. With the positive first, the Fairy type was introduced to quell some of the Dragon spam Generations 4 and 5 were known for. Because yeah, a type resisted by one defensive typing was not desirable at all. So they straight up made a typing immune to Dragon while also being spammable in their own right. Due to this and the game's new Pokemon additions, only a small 71, it made Game Freak go back and change the types of many old Pokemon to make sure this type actually had Mons, completely redefining how those Pokemon will function. Now I did mention the type chart changes already. That's not just the introduction of a new type, because Steel actually got nerfed. Look, we can talk all day about how Steel may have been too definitive as a defensive typing, but to answer this issue, they made it to where Steel no longer resists Dark and Ghosts. From a casual perspective, it's a fine enough change, but in a more competitive approach, it's a bit of an issue. Not as much in Generation 6, but moving on a few generations, we'll get an idea of why with the power of a little exaggeration. And no generation captures this as much as Generation 8. Crazy progress making attacks and knock off a Wicked Blow while being the only way to reliably handle Ghosts makes Dark types absolutely crazy. Meanwhile, Ghosts themselves were already good before with just Shadow Ball alone. You add stuff like Poltergeist and one of Game Freak's biggest mistakes, and it makes having a Dark type feel pretty damn important. And in Yveltal's case, a bit mandatory. No, normal types are a meme. They are not good. What does this sound like to you, buddy? Gen 2? At least in Gen 6, Pursuit kind of exists to help quell the destruction that Ghosts would leave behind, but without it, things are pretty sketchy, leading this to be an issue that hardly affects Generation 6 and 7, but more so 8 and especially 9. Essentially, making the nerfing of Steel a mistake long term, especially as nothing else was given resists to these typings, particularly Ghost, as of course there is one resist and one immunity. Again, normal types, which are a meme type. But mister, there's no way we can sit here and prove that Ghost types are broken. If only there existed a Pokemon that can get away with exclusively clicking a single Ghost type attack while being mono Ghost itself. And to prove that point, I will guide you to the Smogon incident of February 6th, 2021. The day Spectriera clicked a base 80 power attack a little too much. So yeah, over exaggerated for sure, but these type changes end up making Ghost and Dark a little more volatile. That makes it comparable to the Dragon types of Generations 4 and 5. But before moving on, one last note about typings. Some of them, Grass, Electric, Poison, and Ghost, received minor benefits to all the Pokemon on their typings. Those effects are on screen now. But essentially, this helps each Pokemon of the types benefit more than they already did by adding extra layers to their defensive profile, even if they are small. Unless it's Stunfisk, who's now double immune to paralysis. Dude, who's picking these abilities? Moving on, we see the big focal point of Pokemon X and Y. That, of course, being Mega Evolutions. A new in-battle mechanic, allowing a new form with a new ability, sometimes, and new stats. Previously buffing existing Pokemon directly because Game Freak would never decide to do that. While the idea is cute, you'd think sacrificing your item slot for this would be an issue. But considering those items can't be removed at all, it's secretly a blessing in disguise. You know, the complete neutering of Trick and Knockoff. But wait, can such a perfect, too good to be true mechanic possibly have any downsides? Yes. First off, it's a generational gimmick, meaning it's not a permanent feature for all the games. Meaning this piece of garbage loses any hope of being good in modern games. Almost like making the same Pokemon but again would have been a much better alternative. But secondly, it's a feature usable in every single battle after you get the damn thing, allowing you a stat ball, a nuke, or other crazy nonsense all of the time. The feature can work. The competitive scene, for instance, can get away with it since both players should have access to the feature. It's the in-game side of things where everything gets messy, as most of the NPCs in the game you'll battle won't ever have access to the feature for themselves, meaning it's mostly an unfair battle in your favor. Look, you can dunk on Dynamax all you want for its balancing and max airstream existing, but at least Game Freak had the foresight to realize spamming it in every single battle during the main game was a horrible idea. So they restricted your access to the feature to specific locations or features, specifically where your opponent as well has access to the feature. This is where Megas fall behind, and the whole not every Pokemon has one aspect as well, leading to a big gameplay issue made worse when you actually have to gather unique Mega Stones for each Pokemon, potentially making loads of them not available during the main story. Foreshadowing, by the way. way, giving us a feature that can work, just the longer the player doesn't have access to it. We'll talk more about the feature in X and Y's case later, but just use my Sun and Moon video for reference where the feature doesn't hinder the game due to being post-game exclusive. Moving on, we reach something that you'd be surprised to have taken this long to have happen: the rebalancing of previously existing Pokemon. They did this by simply improving stats or changing a few abilities, either of which were capable of pumping life back into Pokemon that need it in some form or fashion, potentially even redefining their playstyle. Sure, Scolipede may still play the game, but now it's even stronger. But now it also has the option to do everything Ninjask does, but better. See, it's almost like they proved exactly how to do what Mega Evolution did, but in a healthier way. But speaking of rebalancing, to a lesser extent, pre-existing attacks and abilities also received readjustments. A few attacks like Chatter, Crabhammer, Defog, and Knockoff were buffed to be noticeably more useful. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, some of the actual good attacks like Ice Beam, Draco Meteor, and Meteor Mash, just to name a few, were made worse to become less over-centralizing, which definitely was important as a lot of these attacks are on loads of Pokemon, which would lead to these strong attacks dominating the move slots of many of the Pokemon in the game, due to how well they were at punching holes through teams. And while not as strong, the variance in hidden power damage being removed is great, but the attack not existing would obviously be a better change. Similarly, abilities also received these ups and downs as well. The 4 weather-altering abilities were nerfed to no longer be permanent due to how blatantly game-changing they were. Meanwhile, other abilities like Overcoat and Infiltrator received extra benefits just to power up what was previously underpowered. Overall, the simple idea of rebalancing stuff like this is great, and in these games' cases was handled very well, unlike how some other games would go off to handle it. Zamazenta nerf. Moving on, we reach actual fun content, that being the new battle formats, which we get 3 of for some reason. First up is Horde Battles. They serve as a fun idea, wild encounters, but there's 5 of them at once, encountered via using honey or sweet scent in the game's overworld grass. It's a cute idea, but like, where's the depth? Where's the trainer battles using this feature? As outside of finding shiny Pokemon or other rare encounters, the feature just ends up being something you like having in a game despite it lacking real purpose in the context of the game. It's fun, but a bit of a bummer. Inverse battles, though, are a neat battle format, just simply taking a single battle format and then inverting the type chart to craft a wildly different battling scene that's genuinely fun. The issue is the fact, of course, that it's limited to once a day to be played, while also being tied to a single trainer, limiting the fun you can get out of it. And finally, that brings us to the last battle format, being Sky Battles. Essentially, it's a unique format against a few trainers in the game where you can only use Pokemon that are not bound to the ground. But not everything is legal, meaning it's essentially just a random ban list, and the catch is, these battles are just annoying. The fact that certain attacks can't even be used at some points just kinda sucks. Sure, we can surf in regular grass or floors of labs, but in an area with clouds? Nope, illegal. Wow, this sucks! Don't worry, it only gets worse from here. As next we have the roaming legendary Pokemon. This feature has never been a fun one, essentially relying on blind luck for extensive periods of time to get things to appear and to be caught. Elsewise, it'll flee with its damage carrying over. As a feature, it's a sick idea, but in execution it's pretty terrible. X and Y step in to just, I don't even know with this feature, as upon beating the game, one of the legendary birds, depending on your starter, will start to appear randomly in the wild. However, whenever they actually show up, they will leave immediately. Yep, no opportunity to catch it or do anything. The catch here is the fact that you have to do this thing of finding them and watching them run away over 10 times before you can even catch the damn thing in this irrelevant cave in a regular battle, essentially removing the part of the feature that was actually unique and instead just adding filler content. And if I've preached about it once, then I've done it at least once, but we sure as hell can make it twice. Filler is never a good addition, unlike the next feature, which actually is a well-warranted feature: the ability to change a Pokemon's ability through an item. The ability capsule, despite being a little pricey, is a phenomenal item, as the simple ability to just change a Pokemon's ability with its other primary ability sure as hell is a welcome addition. But of course, gamers, the fun can't stop here, as another fun addition these games received is the introduction of terrains, essentially being weather, but on the ground, meaning both can be active at the same time. While only 3 of them were introduced here, grassy terrain, electric terrain, and misty terrain, they're all pretty lacking in use cases, kind of like the weather in Generation 2. The reason as to why they're not very good here is pretty simple. Other than the lack of the actual good terrain in this game, the 3 that are here just lack good abusers and setters. Essentially, they're just here at the wrong time, needing to have to wait for the Tapus to come around just to be relevant. And oh boy, were they relevant. A pretty wild change these games brought was the nerf to critical hits, essentially cutting down on the amount of damage these attacks do. Instead of crits boosting damage by 2 times the amount of damage damage done, now it's by 1.5 times the damage done, mainly in an effort to sway them from instantly ending entire games from being so powerful. Honestly, love it or hate it, it was kind of needed. Which brings us to the final mechanical change, and arguably the most important, the change to the game's EXP system. So to even begin with where this game puts us, we have to take a trip back in time to generations 1 through 4, the generations that the elitists love so damn much. Basically in those games, you had a pretty terrible EXP system, splitting the XP through the EXP share, and then anything else that battled the Pokemon that just got KO'd. And without trade modifiers, that was basically it. It sucked due to the sheer lack of EXP you would get across the board, actively discouraging the use of a full team of 6 since they'd all be underleveled without intense grinding. Meanwhile, Generation 5 stepped into the ring and upped both the standard EXP given from each Pokemon, and adding a single multiplier to the EXP formula, affecting the EXP a Pokemon gets based on its level relative to the defeated Pokemon, allowing the underleveled Pokemon to level up faster, and the opposite to be true for the overleveled ones, making the use of a full team of 6 more approachable, but grinding still kind of existed, just to a lesser extent. Which finally brings us to Generation 6 and how it was done differently. Basically, the first thing to note is the EXP share. Now being a key item that affects the whole team. It can be turned off, but why would you do that? Because you're essentially going back to needing to grind your whole team up because they're not getting anything. Turning it off manually like this allows it to essentially work like the Generation 1 through 4 EXP system. However, the way EXP is given to its partners is now different, being a much larger percent than that of the Generation 1 games, or if you just had a whole team holding EXP shares at once. Listen, I don't know the real reasoning for this, I'm not going to pretend to. I'd rather not spread misinformation and the section's already as long as is. But the extra part outside of the other Pokemon that's getting more EXP is the fact they simply did not revert the increased standard EXP rates on the game's Pokemon, meaning they give more EXP than they probably should, again comparing it directly to Generations 1 through 4. And remember, this game does not have that EXP curve like the Generations 5 and 7 onwards games have. That's why I keep comparing it to Generations 1 through 4, leading to inevitable overleveling issues. But hey, that's a different issue saved for the level curve discussion, unlike EXP you get when catching Pokemon. That fun little addition just has to get shoved in at the end. Fun, but not really needed, but it at least doesn't punish you for catching Pokemon. Speaking of which, it's time for us to peek that gameplay discussion now, huh? Oh gamers, we finally reached what's easily my favorite part of these videos. That part where I count all the random Pokemon the game offers, complain about the battle gimmicks but only when they dilute the experience, and of course attempt to spot the flaws or positives that the boss trainers contain, for pacing issues if any exist. So as always, let's begin with the funny numbers. Pokemon X and Y does this really brave thing with its Pokedex this time around, and that brave thing is a massive Pokedex so large that they felt a need to split it into 3 parts. While that last detail doesn't really matter that much, the overall size does, because as we all know, size matters. 454 Pokemon is what the regional Pokedex provides, and if we subtract 5 for the post-game critters, it's 449, a stellar offering for the main game. But if we want to see the entire game's Pokemon offering, all we have to do is add a small 123 from all the game's extra means, so just the Friend Safari, and through that, we get a grand total of 577 Pokemon obtainable within X and Y. Overall, a very strong offering from the game. But wait, mister, how's the type diversity for in-game? Well, it's because of the deck size. Solid, obviously. There's nothing really to argue against. Like, maybe I could argue for a lack of dragons and fairies in the game, but those are the types with the least amount of Pokemon in general. At that point, I'm just trying to reach for something to complain about. But what's not a stretch is the laughable inclusion of Mega Evolution in these games. If for some reason you thought I was harsh on it in the inclusion of Oras for some reason, you haven't seen anything yet. As for some unholy reason, this feature is given to you directly after the 3rd gym, which is not only deceptively early in the game, but the sheer amount of the game's megas are not even obtainable during the main story. So here's the breakdown. 3 of them are completely unobtainable without trading with Oras. You get to use up to 9 during the main story, and you only fight 3 megas during the main game, one of which you're already using, meaning during the main story you'll only ever interact with up to 11 of the game's 30 Mega Evolutions, which feels like an actual embarrassment for the game to introduce the concept. How did they fumble the ball this badly? Sure, the postgame allows you to get up to the 27 obtainable Mega Stones, and you're even able to battle 1 more. Good for you, postgame. But 4 total is still less than what the entire Elite Four rematch teams in Oras even had. This execution is so damn pathetic. Making matters even worse is how you get a bunch of the postgame Mega Stones, as you can only get them during a single hour of a day in the most obscure locations. Mega Evolution as a feature feature needs good execution within the game, else why it wrecks the entire experience, and here it's just a train wreck. Again, you cannot use it, but of course the feature's still there and can be used. Regardless, it's still in the game. Alright pals, it's time for the trainers and nonsense. So with the level curve first, it's complicated. On one hand, you never really need to grind due to the EXP changes, so that filler at least doesn't exist. But the issue this game has is the habit of giving you too much EXP. The beginning in gyms 1 through 3 give you a reasonable amount of EXP, at least from the forced trainers alone. But once gym 4 arrives, and especially the power plant, you can kiss being underleveled goodbye for the rest of the playthrough, as the good EXP yields from the mid game and late game make it pretty hard to fall behind. God forbid you actually want to battle the optional trainers, making the latter part of the game significantly easier than it already is. Which is funny because it makes the first gym arguably the hardest one, and the levels themselves are just pretty funny in terms of pacing, because wow, look at that, the first gym. It's a pretty standard level 12 peak, right into the gym 2 with its peak of 25. Twice. Yeah, whoever thought there needed to be this much content between gyms 1 and 2 was off their rocker. But going on to gym 3, we see a peak of 32, and for some reason going into 4, 34. The odd example of this level curve being jank as hell. Thankfully, after this point, the level curve actually chills out for the remainder of the run. What do you mean Wolfric has a level 59? Okay, whatever, fine. You want to know how the Pokemon League is? 65 on the aces, and then the champion caps at 68, ending pretty high in the highest of the series. If there's anything to take away from this, it's how early the late game part of this game seems to arrive, relatively speaking, within the series. And I'm gonna say it, it's not a great way to handle progression. The middle and early games are super important, so them not having their chance to shine is a bit of a misplay, which leads us to the actual trainers and their teams. And of course there's a minor issue here. Gym leader Pokemon not featuring full movesets. And I guess the size of their teams as well, but that's a different story. As at least one Pokemon on each of the teams features a needlessly empty move slot, unless it's Olympia's team for some reason. The issue is just how much it affects difficulty in contrast to something like level curve issues or game mechanic shenanigans, as if your opponent can't do much to a large variety of opponents due to its lack of options, they'll end up becoming ungodly easy to play around, which is the most important part of a game's challenge in my humble opinion. After all, they can have the levels that they need. It won't matter if they're unable to even damage their targets. Look back at Red and Blue with Blue's Exeggutor essentially being a wasted team slot on a champion team. Although this does bring us to a rather interesting question. Are Pokemon X and Y too easy? And to that, I gotta say it bluntly, yes. From the boss trainers being extremely lacking in the amount of Pokemon they have, the super training and affection boost, even unlimited use TMs and vast level up movesets are all here to ensure that your Pokemon can clean house, and to a notable type chart rework to even the level curve that already discourages grinding and battling optional trainers, and even early access to Mega Evolution before the second half of the game even starts, and likely even so much more features. It's pretty easy to see how all of this can snowball into a game that essentially plays itself. Challenge will always improve a game, especially if it's not overbearing, but being too easy, well, it can have the effect of making the game a bit boring. Look at Sword and Shield as well as Let's Go games for that example. It also has a bit of an inverse effect at making your options for the game far more usable. It's a game better built to allow your bad options many more opportunities to succeed. Where using a Delibird in Black 2 and White 2 might be a terrible idea, the idea of using a Delcatty in X and Y is significantly more manageable. Apply that line of thought to many more Pokemon in the game, and you'll see your list of Pokemon you're tempted to use increase drastically, allowing for more options and of course replayability, and a series that generally succeeds with that front to begin with. Bundle that with the lacking HM restrictions and all the other replayability boosting qualities, it leaves us with a game that works pretty well as a brain-off experience that's at least pretty easy to come back to. And honestly, it might be better off that way. The most thrilling part of Pokemon X and Y is the post-game offering. Not because the common falsehoods of a non-existent post-game, but rather a decent offering that's just kind of boring, alongside a general list of features that are pretty solid across the board. So let's begin with the game's lineup of battle facilities, starting with the Mason. I'm just gonna say it like that, it's probably wrong. Being the game's big thing. A battle facility featuring standard restriction Pokemon ban list with legal Mega Evolutions, featuring access to the 5 battle format and what's essentially a hard mode for each one for the first time you beat each. The standard difficulty is 20 battles in a row, and the hard is 50 with the boss trainer on those fights. Overall, it's a fun time, and the fact that you can just take a break whenever you want to between fights is just the icing on top. Congrats! The battle tower is obsolete now because we have a better battle facility that does the same thing. It's a shame it couldn't stay that way. The battle chateau is an annoying feature, a place that lets you battle trainers, mainly being useful for EXP and money. The annoying part of this is that there's an internal progression system, meaning you actually need to play here via battling the trainers to even do what gives the feature any relevance. Of course, being gym leader in Elite 4 rematches, because yeah, any round 2 type business doesn't exist here, and this is what you're gonna have to settle for. By the way, their teams here are actually smaller too, so good lord, why does this exist? I'm gonna say it, man, it's a D tier feature. So for some reason, the Battle Institute from the Gen 5 games is also here. It's still neat as it's completely unchanged, being that performance graded gameplay. So stop having a skill issue and go perform well. But moving on to a more obscure feature, we have the game's restaurants, serving as something close to a battle facility, as you have to pay up money to choose a battle format to indulge in a chain of set trainers in a row without a single break. The catch is, each battle you have a target amount of turns to win on, and should you do so, you get better rewards at the end, with those items intended to be sold for actual money, allowing you to get away with more money than you came in with. But even if you fail to reach that number, there's no real punishment, so it's pretty nice. Speaking of nice is another new feature, the Friend Safari. It's a neat area you can go to with a Pokemon selection purely tied to the pools of Pokemon, unique to each individual on your friends list. Despite it being blind luck, even featuring the chance for hidden abilities on the Pokemon, with loads of them from outside the main game, it makes it a truly thrilling experience. Unlike the Poké Radar, which is not so thrilling this time around, as it's a nice inclusion as always, forcing Shaking Grass to spawn in order to find Pokemon, the issue comes from the lack of bonus encounters, which just ends up leading to the feature feeling kinda useless outside of the chaining bonuses. A new feature for the mainline games to be introduced here is trainer customization. It does, as you would expect, changes how your trainer would look in-game, in battle, and cutscene, allowing for every trainer you build to be unique. However, there is one crack in the mold, and that is the shop system. After all, you do need to buy clothing in the first place, and the issue comes down to the shop's daily rotation, making it to where you have to wait throughout the week just for the game's few shops to have what you want, making getting the stuff you want not very fun. Good feature, shoddy execution. Speaking of customization, did you know the options menu has a way to customize the bottom screen in battle? I'm sorry, that wasn't a very fun fact. We'll move on to the bottom screen features. So first is the PSS, a feature used for most of the game's wireless and online features, while being extremely easy to communicate with other players while using. Sadly, due to emulation, this stuff can't really be showcased, but it does rock. Features included are the GTS, battling other trainers, and the newly birthed Wonder Trade, allowing you to trade a Pokemon to be paired with another random trainer across the internet to get what's seemingly a random Pokemon. And thankfully, this works between both Generation 6 games, which keeps the variety up, with the last addition here being O-Powers, essentially the past powers of Generation 6, except now you can use them on yourself, through just generally being a better feature, leaving the PSS as a whole to be a pretty large W that sadly has not been matched since. On the bottom screen, we also have Pokemon-Ami, a feature that allows you to interact with your Pokemon by petting them, feeding them cupcakes, and of course bringing them along for some mini games. The experience is cute and all, but there's a strong gameplay feature being hidden here, that of the affection boost. You know, the biggest issue with BDSP. Basically, if you interact with your Pokemon here, they'll be able to obtain some very powerful boosts for the in-game experience. So thankfully it won't end up plaguing online and the battle facilities, while also just being completely optional. But why these boosts are overkill is pretty simple, and you'll see why as I list them off right now. But all these bonuses include your Pokemon receiving a chance to shed off any status condition at the end of a turn, a chance to survive any fatal attack, increased evasion, increased crit rates, and of course, increased EXP gain. 5 extremely overpowered traits capable of trivializing an already outlandishly easy game. This is where I have to reiterate that it is completely optional, unless you're playing BDSP or Let's Go. But if you give in, good luck getting rid of it. Which of course leads us to the final bottom screen feature being Super Training, a feature designed to allow you easy access to EV training for your stat optimization needs, killing the need to manually grind out EVs, from doing the Super Training minigame or through the punching bags earned in this manner. It's nice and very effective, and the game even includes a bag to to reset all EVs just in case you made an oopsies. But regardless, this has been the easiest it's ever been to get and simply view your EVs, and that is pretty wicked. If you don't really care about this feature, you can just use it to see your team at any point in time, so that's also kind of helpful. A way more minor feature that you only remember exists because of my ORAS video is Pokémiles, introduced as another currency because apparently money in BP was not enough. So Pokémiles were added as its own little thing, collected by walking around the region and by connecting with other players. Yeah, this nonsense is surprisingly obscure. At least there's a guy you can redeem them to get some nice rewards. But like, why does this exist? Speaking of asking why, did you guys remember that you can make your own TikToks in these games? Yeah, the PR Video Studio thing, it can be used to make some absolute cringe. Overall, as a feature, it's pretty damn solid, but again, I gotta ask, why? Moving on to the last feature is the camera spots, allowing you in the overworld to take pictures of places in the game and save them to your 3DS. Wow, who cares? Which leads us to the negatives in X and Y's features. And first up is the progression in Lumio City itself, as for some reason the city has its own stuff going on in terms of just junk. Essentially, the game wants you to do stuff in the city to get more in return for the long run. For instance, there's this clothing shop you can't even use until you've done plenty of stuff in the area, and then other stuff like new hairstyles, shop discounts, the video stuff, and other stuff added to other shops, all being unlocked from playing around with this. It's an issue due to just being a time and money investment, just to open the features up that are seemingly locked off for no reason. So in terms of general cut content, there's not much, but Chatot losing its special gimmick with the move Chatter sucks. The secondary effects were standardized due to the attack receiving a minor rework, and due to the feature not being able to change its cry anymore, it's no longer able to lie about the quality of Paper Mario Sticker Star by saying it's good. Great job, Chatot. Glad to see this change got you unbanned from VGC. And finally, a pretty notable cut feature, especially now, is the removal of an in-game Pokemon transfer method. As through the game alone, there is no way for you to bring up Pokemon from generations 5 through 6. And they did make an out-of-game way to do so. The problem is you're not able to even get the service anymore. So if you want to get your Pokemon into Gen 6 or 7, or if you want to move them up to Gens 8 or 9, you better believe the eBay scalpers are going to have your back. And you better hope they're not lying about Pokemon Bank being installed. Yeah, this sucks quite a bit, but you know the saying, ladies and gentlemen, corporate greed. But for now, that'll cover all the features, so let's move on. So, when I was talking about ORAS, I said something about Pokemon's transition to 3D not being very good. Thankfully for Pokemon X and Y, that's only half true. In the case of those games, the overworld was kinda ew, and here it looks surprisingly good, for early 3DS standards anyways. The overworld trainer models look solid, and their transition into battle isn't as grotesque as the other Gen 6 games had. The set pieces are nice, and generally pretty good. Now, in actual battle, we got a few issues. Obviously. While the battle scenes themselves are fine, that's not the issue. It's the Pokemon models. As we went from sprites to better sprites to sprites with more personality for 2 generations, and then of course animated sprites, which meant it was time for the 3D models, and they look fine. It's the animations, or the lack of, that make it a minor issue. As yeah, some Pokemon have some animation work going on, but many feel abnormally stiff. And you'll get this as soon as I compare Gen 6 Groudon to that of Pokemon Battle Revolution. As here, it's just incredibly hunched over and again, stiff, versus not only being stanced up in a way that's unique to it, but noticeably having an ounce of life to the damn thing. And this applies to loads of other Pokemon. And you may think the idle animations don't matter as much as I'm making it out to be. The fake tree being lifeless is an improvement, but some Pokemon just end up becoming foul to observe, as the Sky Battle feature existing needs to make most of the flying types and various levitators float, so all of those legal Pokemon have to be in the air now, leading to a few horrible situations where Pokemon are just suspended in the air, and it's not pretty at all. Swellow being the poster child of whatever this is supposed to be. It looks like it's getting forward momentum, but it's not even really moving. Why does this exist? You have wings, just flap them, buddy! Tropius, Skarmory, and to a greater extent Xatu are the others that really stand out, but nothing will ever come close to the neutering of Electros. Good lord, what am I looking at? This is one of the best examples of an animated 2D sprite being completely ruined. But this isn't the only issue here, as these models were recycled for so long, bleeding into other games, which would of course be minor problems for all those games that had it to have. Moving towards a more positive note though is the music. While a bit forgettable, it's pretty solid. It's just a surprisingly nice selection overall that's just pretty nice. I'd even argue great, although I really don't know what else you want for me to say, other than the fact it's time for the story. God help me. Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to understand something. The story of X and Y is pretty bad. Easily the single worst aspect this game has, which honestly sucks because there are good aspects among its contents. Trying to simply recap the story is generally pretty difficult due to how much stuff ends up happening and how little any of it really matters. As always, you move in, you get dragged into getting a starter Pokemon and a Pokedex, while being forced into a friendship with some of Pokemon's worst characters. We'll get back to them later. The important thing of note is that you and those fools that you're sadly forced to associate with are on a quest from the professor, obviously completing the Pokédex and uncovering the secrets of Mega Evolution. Although we all know the real goal is just beating the Pokemon League. It always is. But of course, the story here involves you getting involved with the Fashion Police, Team Flare. While we'll also get back to these guys later, they're the evil team and their goal is... Yeah, this question goes unanswered for quite a while, and if that's not a big red flag, I don't know what is. But yeah, you'll fight these guys on and off until the climax of the game, where their leader tries to set off the ultimate weapon using the legendary Pokemon to wipe out humanity, or something. But get this, you exist, so obviously that's not gonna happen, and the evil plan is stopped, so you get the last gym badge and beat the game. The end. That's the general idea, but obviously I cut a lot out, because that stuff needs a closer look. So let's start with the rivals. Holy hell, they are bad. All 4 of them. All of them are very cookie cutter and have any lack of depth or likability for that matter. Your main rival, based on the gender not picked, is just generic, oh let me help nonsense, while also wanting to be a better trainer and say neighbor in every single sentence directed to remind you that yes, in fact, you are neighbors. Just nothing. Shauna? Honestly, I didn't even notice there was a character here. Essentially, her only thing is, wow friends, I'm so glad we're on this adventure together. Yep, this sucks. Tierno's got an obsession with building a team of dancing Pokemon. Whoop-de-doo! This is a nothing character. And of course that leaves us with Trevor. No way, he wants to work on the Pokedex. That's crazy. Okay, at least there's an ounce of character growth here. I guess with the whole, hey, let's help out in the Frost Caverns thing, but good lord, does it feel like I'm stretching to find anything of value. TLDR, too many rivals with nowhere near enough screen time to flesh any of them out. And the archetypes themselves being boring surely doesn't do them any favors. But wait, mister, what about the other characters? Silly viewer, the gym leaders are hardly characters, and arguably, outside of Malva and Diantha, the Elite Four struggles from the same fate, which just leaves us with Team Flare. They are the evil team, and their goals are extremely vague, until the game's like, hey, we're just gonna set off the ultimate weapon, Lamau, just randomly in the back half of the game. Dude, it feels like they go from a 2 to a 10 too fast. The individual characters, however, is where the issues start to arise once again. The Team Flare scientists, yes, all 5, of course. Say it with me. They are not good characters in the slightest. While a lot of the issues come down to screen time, the sheer lack of any personality really puts them in the grave in a way that the rivals don't even suffer from. Yes, even Xerosic is thrown in here despite the post-game narrative at least giving him some more relevance. But hey, who cares? We're finally dug through the trash to find the gems, as there's only 2 characters in this game that I even found to leave a positive taste on this experience. First is Lysander, an odd one for sure, but hear me out. He is the Team Flare boss, a man with dreams to preserve the beauty in this world and end its constant struggle. So to do so, he wants to use the ultimate weapon to purge as much of humanity as possible, to bring humanity to a peace of some kind. The problem is the moral complexity here. You know, if there was even an argument for mass genocide being morally complex. As for him to succeed in his plans, Pokemon would need to die. And of course, he doesn't want to do that, because Pokemon are in fact beautiful creatures. Except Seaking, get that garbage out of here. But yeah, the man either has to sit here with Pokemon and watch the world wilt, or he can kill them in just about everything to make the world in the ideal image. Of course he picks the latter because you gotta fight the evil people, and even with the last ditch effort after you've gotten the legendary and stuff, he ends up firing what little that the weapon can fire and ends up destroying the weapon itself? Maybe he was trying to strike you down on your friends, but like, bro, that's your hope for succeeding. What are you, stupid? Whatever, after he's gone, there's one last moment for him as a character through the professor's little monologue about him and their little friendship. But overall, Lysander's a surprisingly nice character, but only when you slow down a bit to overanalyze him, you know, instead of just mashing the A button. But wait, one more character remains, and it's the one that button mashing surprisingly does not ruin. AZ, a tall man with a large backstory. It all dates back to 3,000 years ago through lore. That, yes, is tied to Mega Evolution itself somehow, and is important for X and Y, as well as Oraz's history to a lesser extent. But essentially, he lives a tragic tale living for 3,000 years somehow, all the way back to when there was a war. One of his Pokemon went off to fight in it and tragically perished. Clearly, it broke the man enough for him to somehow manifest a weapon capable of reviving the little fella, and he ends up pulling it off. But the grief he sustained in that period waned on him like nothing else, to the point where he turned the weapon of life into a weapon of mass destruction, ending the war with one blast of death and wiping out countless lives. AZ, just like war, had changed, and due to that, the revived Pokemon left him all alone to wander the planet for 3,000 years, leading up of course to the main story, where he kind of just exists for a second, gets captured by Team Flare for some reason, before just generally getting shafted in terms of screen time. But hey, look, the game has been beaten and he shows up again right before the credits for a simple battle, and regardless of whether you win or lose, it's enough to spark a fire in his heart to enjoy Pokemon once again. And apparently that's all he needed to see the one that broke him all those lifetimes ago, finally completing a tragic tale. A short story, but an effective one. Bravo. Overall, for the game's story, it kinda sucks, as there's some nice stuff, the extra baggage end up dragging the story to the ground. And I haven't even mentioned Dexio and Cena yet. Like, why are they even in the game? Yeah, nice superhero alert, pals. But how about y'all, you know, actually do something? But yeah, that's overanalyzing X and Y's story. Meaning it's time to tie the knot on the game. At its best, Pokemon in X and Y is one of the most simple, streamlined experiences within the series. And at its worst, it's a Pokemon game that requires no brain power to even attempt to play, leading to it all being kind of boring. Wait a second, that sounds familiar. It's not like the games are objectively bad or anything, it's just not very thrilling. A game that's just fine, with its best aspect being its sheer lack of tedium, and very solid replayability. While on the other hand, its largest issues just come down to no difficulty, mediocre post-game content, and bad implementation of its generational gimmick. But of course, the quality never mattered apparently, meaning the question in the title now stands about that legacy these games left behind. And that of course is the fact that it kickstarted two trends, the first of which the game being noticeably easier, and the second being the fact that they have to include a generational gimmick in every generation just to jingle the keys in front of the 9-year-old. Well, that part's pretty self-explanatory, introducing stuff that's not that good, one success and one drastic failure. The difficulty part is where people actually care about. It's not just due to all the factors that generally make the games easier, but specifically the EXP share change is the identity of this game, as the rest of the series to this day would have that team-wide effect, and generally easier fights together alongside a bunch of power creep for you to abuse. But the simple fact that you're not grinding is apparently an issue? Removing hours, if not days, or in the Johto game's cases, weeks of grinding filler content, just because the EXP system was trash. Removing this is good, because keeping it in the game just through an illusion of difficulty, because when you're drastically underleveled, it doesn't quite make the game hard in the traditional sense. It just hides the actual difficulty. Sure, Pokemon games have always been easy. The earliest games, especially when you're actually at the level ranges that the games want you to match, are complete jokes. You only remember these fights being hard because you battled them 20 levels under back when you were a measly 9 years of age. Hell, not even to mention, all of this legacy isn't even completely true, as the Ultra games are easily some of the hardest games the series has, and to pretend Scarlet and Violet as well as BDSP is equal to that of X and Y and Sword and Shield is just a delusional fantasy, man. Listen, I could really save this rant for an entire video on its own, and due to that, we'll cut this discussion here and just get on to the point. And ask, how good are Pokemon X and Y actually? It's a 3-star experience, it's nothing exceptional, and the opposite of a chore to play. Hell, I'd even argue it's on par with that mess that is Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And should you play X and Y? Yes, just to see what this damn fiasco and Disdain is all about, despite there being no reason for there to even be one at all. The vibes in these kind of arguments are not fun. And with that said, we are done here. So as always, thank you for watching, and it'd be sick if you dropped your thoughts on the games down below. And until next time, could we just stop pretending that Mega Evolution is this fix-all anything feature that just improves anything it touches?